Hello, my name is Ellie Luger, and this is the voiceover for my final project for Dr. Paige Reynolds, and her class is English 2390, Introduction to Drama. The title of my presentation is Hamlet, a retelling of the classic tragedy. My presentation goes through 4 separate categories, but we're only going to look at 3, as the last one is for my works cited. The first portion of my presentation is the others' performance ideas. Within this portion, we're going to look at books, movies, and other plays that I'm gathering my inspiration from. So for the first movie I've looked at would be The Banquet from 2006. This is a Chinese historical fantasy drama that follows a crown prince who isn't banished, but he runs away from the palace after his father marries a woman that he's in love with. And while he is away at a very remote theater, learning music and dance, his father is murdered by his uncle, Li, and Li becomes the emperor. Well, once he is on the throne, Emperor Li dispatches riders to assassinate the crown prince, but he survives the attack, and once he survives it, he decides to return to the court, where he meets with Empress Wan, and they decide to enact her plan to kill her murderous husband. Within this movie, it's set roughly within the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period of Chinese history, which is roughly the 10th century, but it doesn't have a set time period, which is what I want to use for my own play, where it's super fantastical, but you can't really pinpoint it to any small portion of history, which gives it that otherworldly effect, along with the themes of murder and not knowing who you can trust. The second movie, which is a Hamlet retelling, both are, is called The Bad Sleep Well from 1960. This is a Japanese murder noir, where it's a murder mystery almost. But the illegitimate son, Koichi Nishi, climbs to a very high position within a Japanese corporation and marries the crippled daughter of the company's vice president, Iwabuchi. But at their reception for their wedding, the wedding cake is a replica of their corporate headquarters, but an aspect of the design reminds the partygoers of the hushed-up death of Nishi's father. And within this is what triggers Nishi's plan to avenge his father's death. Now, this movie is not very straightforward, but it is a very good movie because it uses the themes of social and personal corruption, but they're also intertwined in how they lead to the characters' dooms. It's very similar to American noir and poetic realism, or realists, which help make this movie feel as if it could actually happen, where it is very similar to true events, but it is in fact fictional. I don't want my personal retelling to be like this, but I want to bring in the dark and gritty aspect of the American noir genre of movie, even though this is a Japanese film. I also looked at other different types of books for my film, and I looked at 7 different series, and they are A Court of Thorns and Roses, The Cruel Prince, 6 of Crows, The Hobbit, From Blood and Ash, The Poppy War, and The Serpent and the Wings of Night. All of these series have many things in common, but the main thing that is pulling them together for me is magic. Almost all of them use magic very heavily within their stories. It almost uses magic as a way to pull the story together. The main 4 that I am pulling from are A Court of Thorns and Roses, The Poppy War, 6 of Crows, and The Hobbit, which are in bold and underlined on the presentation side. Why these 4? Simple. They all have people fighting a war, and they all rely heavily upon magic, which is what I want to portray in my rendition of Hamlet. I also looked at other movies, which include The Dark Crystal, The Lord of the Rings, The Witch, Sleepy Hollow, The Black Cauldron, The Secret of Nim, Spirited Away, Crimson Peak, Coraline, The Huntsman Winter's War, and Atlantis, The Lost Empire. All of these movies are very different in genre and theming, but the one thing that does pull them together is just the whole underlying portion of the fantasy elements within the dark and gothic atmosphere. Most of these movies have also very strong visual styles and very complex characters and themes, which would also play into how Hamlet also has very strong characters and very complex themes. The main themes within these movies and books are the battle between good and evil, personal growth, and the struggle against darker forces. On the next portion, which would be my performance ideas, we have the summary of the movie that I want to produce, and I want this to be a movie instead of a play because it's going to reach more audiences instead of a traditional play would, as well as modernizing almost the story of Hamlet to try and push it more towards younger people instead of an older audience. So the title of my movie would be Realm of the Fallen, or something similar, and the summary is: Prince Hamlet loses his father, the king, under mysterious circumstances. His uncle, skilled in dark magic, usurps the throne, banishes Hamlet, and after this, Hamlet must navigate a world of political intrigue and magical dangers to reclaim his rightful place on the throne. But in this land, no one can be trusted, but Hamlet has to ally with the neighboring kingdoms to get his throne back. But within this world, magic runs rampant, and Hamlet has to fight alongside people who can wield magic but are no longer fully sane. So the last sentence, where Hamlet must fight alongside people who can wield magic, comes from the book The Poppy War. Within that trilogy, a very few people can wield magic like no one else can. They're very strong, very powerful, but the longer they use the magic, the more they lose themselves. They are no longer fully mentally there, and so are insane. And I want to add that in to show that his uncle Claudius is slowly losing his mind due to the dark magic he uses. So the main driving question of this rendition of Hamlet would be, can justice prevail in a realm where shadows hold sway? So this question kind of delves into the central themes of justice and corruption, melancholy, and the struggle against darkness that are really integral to both Hamlet and many fantasy narratives, especially the ones that I've spoken about before. It also prompts exploration into whether moral integrity and truth can triumph over deceit and political intrigue within a magical and fantastical setting. And to back this up, I have the quote from Act 1, Scene 2 of Hamlet, and it is, "Oh, that is too solid flesh would melt, thaw and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting had not fixed his cannon 'gainst self-slaughter. O God, God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world." So this quote reveals Hamlet's profound despair and disillusionment with life, which sets the tone of darkness and melancholy within this whole play. And I want to include the grungy aspect of a war-stricken kingdom, which will help pull in the more tones and themes into this movie. The second quote I have is from King Hamlet, or the Ghost, from Act 1, Scene 5, where he is talking to his son about his murder. And he says, "Murder most foul, as in the best it is, but the most foul, strange, and unnatural." He describes the murder as foul, strange, and unnatural, which adds to the sinister and unsettling tone of the play, which is something I want to play up. I want the audience to feel as if they can no longer just relax and watch a fun movie. They have to be on the edge of their seats because they don't know what's going to happen next. The third portion of my presentation is casting, costuming, and set design. So for casting, I would have Hamlet be played as Joe Keery, and I would have Ophelia played by Maitreyi Ramakrishnan. On the next slide, you can see who they are. Joe Keery is known for playing in Stranger Things and in his movie Spree, while Maitreyi is known for playing in the series Never Have I Ever and Turning Red. Both of them are very skilled actor and actresses, and I believe that they would make a very good fit into this by pulling in more modern ideas and not modern sayings, but modern tongue almost. But they're also going to be playing people who are roughly 20 to 30, like mid-20s, which will help bring in the younger audience. So for Queen Gertrude, I would have Kate Blanchett play her, and I would have Claudius be played by Ma Dong-seok. Kate Blanchett is known for her portrayal in School for Good and Evil and Don't Look Up, as well as playing in The Hobbit. Now, Ma Dong-seok, apologies, his name is Korean, is known for playing in the horror movie Train to Busan and The Gangster, the Cop, and the Devil, as well as playing in Marvel's Eternals. Both of these actors, I believe, would be able to play well off of each other, with Cate Blanchett not playing someone who's helpless, but playing somebody who is under dark magic, and Ma Dong-seok is known for playing that gangster version of certain characters, and I think he could play a very evil Claudius, which is what I want him to do. Now for King Hamlet, I have Carey Payton playing him. He's known for playing in the television show The Walking Dead, who he portrays King Ezekiel. And within that, he plays a very fantastical King Ezekiel, where he speaks almost in very traditional Shakespearean lines. If you've ever seen the show, you know what I'm speaking of. But this is a picture of him when he's portraying King Ezekiel. And I think the vibe and the aesthetic he brings will help portray this whole idea of the dark and gritty fantasy kingdom that I want to portray. So for costuming, you can see that I really want to lean into the Hobbit or Lord of the Rings style outfits. Almost medieval, but not quite. Because if you look at the pictures on the left, a lot of the women's costumes are very impractical. You have the long sleeves where they're bell sleeves and you really can't do much with them. Their hair is down around them. They are wearing long dresses that drag on the ground. And even the men wear very impractical clothing, while the men on the right are wearing, shorter pants. They're wearing capes to keep them warm and keep the water off them while they travel. And I want to show that transition from the nobility, the palace, the security of it that Hamlet has, to show him in transition to having to fight for his survival, essentially. On the next slide, you can kind of see where I want to go more with it. These are two different pictures of fan art from the book series A Court of Thorns and Roses and The Poppy War. You can see in A Court of Thorns and Roses, while yes, one or two of the characters are wearing clothing that is pretty practical, overall, it's very impractical. It's very flashy and garish and gaudy. While The Poppy War, these four characters are wearing skin-tight tunics with weapons, and they're able to move freely in them, and also they're black to help hide them in the shadows whenever they're hunting or fighting. This is what I really want to portray within this film. On the next slide, you can see the three different outfits, which I kind of also want to use. I want to use these as inspiration for Claudius's outfits, at least, because the capes are very dramatic and they're poofy, and they make it almost impossible for him to wield a sword, really, because he doesn't need to wield a sword, but he wants to show that he can afford all this extra fabric and that he is the rightful king, even though he is not. So for set design, the first picture you see is from Lord of the Rings, and it doesn't really have a set time period or a set location. It's in a magical land where there's really no actual earthly time system like we have. But it's filled with dangerous magic, which you don't see when the movie first plays because everything's bright and it's white and it's clean almost. But as the movie progresses and Hamlet is thrown out of the kingdom and he's fighting for his life, you can see that on the next slide we have the darker, grungier, not quite dirty but almost dirty ideas and pictures of the land that he's in. Within the first picture, the biggest one, that's one of the kingdoms that he's going to have to go to because it's dark and dangerous and he doesn't know what to expect and he can't trust anyone, which makes this whole movie more intriguing to the audience because no matter who you meet, he can't fully trust them, but he has to trust them because that's the only people he can rely on. As for my works cited, I have Hamlet by William Shakespeare, The Banquet, which was directed by Feng Xiaogang, and The Bad Sleep Well, who was directed by Akira Kurosawa. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.